MathTara! MathTara, MathTara, tara't isolve natin ang mga problema. MathTara, MathTara, panahon na natin para magsaya. MathTara, wow! Eto na talaga ang MathTara. Hello guys, I'm Justin Dela Rosa.
I am Ellie Gotoc.
I'm Templo.
I'm Kaycee, Yong.
And I'm Yong.
Welcome to the show where numbers rule our lives. This is
MathTara!
And for our pilot episode, let us take you on a journey here in
Cavite!
When we hear the word mathematics, most of us associate it with the words numbers, formulas, and difficult. With this perception towards the mentioned subject, it is oftenly avoided, especially by students. While mathematics does involve numbers, operations, and complicated formulas, which sometimes makes a subject difficult to understand, we also have to keep in mind that it creates a significant impact in our lives. This is the reason why it is taught to us regardless of our chosen career paths. For us to appreciate the beauty of mathematics, let us list down 3 different and relevant reasons as to why it is important in our daily lives. First, mathematics enhances our critical thinking skills, which involves analysis and careful evaluation. As we live in the era of digitalization, information is everywhere. However, not every information is true. Every time we see something on the internet, we must assess this first, if it is true or false. Or else, we would blindly believe everything we see on the internet. A specific topic in mathematics that can help us, and this one is called logic, which will be tackled on the latter parts of the video. Next, mathematics helps us in decision making. For us to survive and strive, we must carefully create sound decisions. Most of the time, our decisions are based on numerical figures. Why did a college student decide to save money? Because they are low in cash already. Why did an individual decide to save electricity? Because the rates are going up. Why did an investor decide to buy stocks? Because prices are going down. Our world is complicated, which makes living complicated as well. But mathematics is there to help us. And last but not the least, mathematics is everywhere. Determining how far our destination, estimating our time of arrival, counting money for online shopping purchases, and the list goes on. We might not realize it since we often limit mathematics as an academic subject only to be encountered in schools, but it is present in every direction we look at. So no matter how much effort you exert in avoiding mathematics, you can't. And that is okay. Mathematics is not a monster we think it is. And it is time for us to embrace it.
Correct! Now, para sa ating episode for today, we have 2 segments that will surely interest you. One about logic and another about social choice theory. For our first segment on logic, this is...
Talaga ba be? Ay, teka lang. Bakit nga ba talaga ba be ang title?
Kasi ang pag-uusapan natin dito ay ang mga pamahiin o superstitions na siguradong mapapatanong ka ng, totoo ba talaga yan, be?
Ah, kaya pala. So, Chi, can you talk more about our topic for today, which is about Philippine superstitions?
Okay. The Philippines has numerous superstitions which have been part of our practices, history, and culture. Ever since our ancestors have worshipped and believed in gods and spirits, which until now still cling to us. Furthermore, as we have been colonized and interacted with various heritage and our own, our beliefs for superstitions continuously evolve. These superstitions are passed down through generations, since we are taught to respect, listen, and follow our elders, we embody and believe what they have passed down. Unknowingly, we are living our daily life living on it. From the moment our utensils drop, we see a black cat while walking, or even attend events such as funerals, we are mindful of what we should do and not do based on superstitions. Because we are drawn to good lucks and fortunes and try hard to avoid the bad lucks and misfortunes. And the superstitions gives us a sense of relief that we can preserve our luck in life if we follow it. In this sense, it is becoming a manual in which we must know and follow to avoid consequences and welcome blessings. It is a manual in which we base our life decisions on luck rather than rational thinking. Even if we become progressive and technologically advanced, I believe these superstitions will continue to affect our daily lives, decisions, and values. However, I also think that despite the history and culture clinging to it, we must also be mindful and rational with what we believe and not purely depend our life on luck and superstitions.
Wow naman! I agree with what you said about Philippine superstitions ha. And thank you very much, Chi, for that wonderful intro ha. But now, going back to the nature of mathematics, we shall talk about our first math topic for today, which is logic. So what is logic? Logic, in basic terms, is the study of correct reasoning and arguments. It is an organized body of knowledge or science that evaluates arguments. It aims to develop a system of methods and principles that we may use as criteria for evaluating the arguments of others and as guides in constructing arguments of our own. In this topic, you may confuse reasoning with thinking. Thinking just offers thoughts or ideas that come to us one after another. It is a mere enumeration of facts or ideas. Reasoning goes beyond that. Because in reasoning, we consciously link together thoughts or ideas to make up inferences, which are processes by which a proposition is arrived at and affirmed on the basis of some other propositions.
The two topics discussed beforehand may seem utterly irrelevant to each other at first glance, but that is not actually the case at hand. While the reliability of people to these superstitions may vary differently based on the beliefs of each individual, the factuality of these superstitions cannot be simply determined. But if you think about it, the usual format of superstitions is somewhat similar to propositional statements. An example is the cliché, "You will live a long life if you eat pancit." It can be seen that the superstition is formed by two statements. First is a statement P, "If you eat pancit," followed by statement Q, "You will live a long life." In this way, superstitions transform into propositional variables, which in turn become operands that can have their validity be proved through various means. However, please note that real-life situations would still differ, as the following superstitions would only be proved using logical reasoning, no matter how sensible or senseless they may be. As such, the hosts, program, and the management are not to be held liable for any viewers who would act in accordance with the superstitions that may be proved as part of this segment.
Okay, tama ng ating pa-intro for today's video. Because right now, we will be giving you 3 examples of Philippine superstitions and we will explain it one by one with the topic of logic in mind.
Okay, simulan na natin!
Yes!
So currently, nandito po tayo sa Hidden Tapsihan to have a quick meal. Salamat po. Ay, hala, nalaglag yung kutsara. Anyways, this is where our first superstition, which is food-related, comes to play.
Pag-inis ka na ba? Grabe yung engagement, Mari. Aloha.
True. When a spoon falls, you will have a woman visitor. When a fork falls, you will have a man visitor. When a teaspoon falls, you will have a child visitor. Recalling the mentioned statement in the previous clip, a phrase states, "If the teaspoon falls, then there will be a child visitor." Do you think that this is valid? Before we answer this question, let's start to determine what the statement is. This statement is considered a proposition because it is a declarative statement which you can determine if it's true or false. If a statement cannot be determined if it's true or false, then that is not a proposition. This includes those imperative statements and interrogative questions. Let's divide this statement into two propositional variables, P and Q. Propositional variables refer to the proposition with an undetermined value. Now, let P be the phrase the teaspoon falls, and Q as there is a child visitor. If we combine the propositions and propositional variables, then we'll have a logical operators. And there are actually 5 logical operators as you can see on the screen. First is the negation. It has a symbol called tilde and has the meaning of not. Second is the conjunction, which has the symbol of caret and meaning of end. Third is disjunction, which has a symbol of inverted caret and meaning of or. Fourth is the conditional, which has a symbol of arrow and has the meaning of if then. Lastly, the biconditional has the symbol of double arrow and has the meaning of if and only if. As mentioned, if we look at the biconditional of the two propositional variables, it will be that teaspoon falls if and only if there is a child visitor. Fun fact, biconditional also means conjunction of two conditionals. So it is if the teaspoon falls, then there is a child visitor, and if there is a child visitor, then the teaspoon falls. Now, let us consider the conditional, converse, contrapositive, and inverse as presented in the presentation. Which do you think is equivalent to the original conditional? To determine this, we need to use a truth table. Since we have two propositional variables, then we'll have 4 possible outcomes. As you can see, the original implication is on the left of each table. The proposition P is also referred to as the hypothesis, and the proposition Q is referred to as the conclusion. And this logical operator could be thought of as a contract. In the first row of original implication, we can see that the contract is followed, and so the conditional is true. In the second possibility, we can see that the contract is violated, and so it is false. In the third row, because the hypothesis is already false, there is no contract to begin with. However, we still need to assign a truth value for it, which we call as a vacuously true, so it is true. In the last row, since the hypothesis is also false and the contract is met, then it is true. Now that we know the truth values of the original implication, we can now start comparing it to converse. In the converse, we'll see true, true, false, and true. Now let's see if they are equivalent through biconditional. In biconditional, it will only be true if the two propositions have the same values. So now we'll use the truth values of this with the underline. This will result in true, false, false, and true. Since this is not always true, then they are not equivalent. Moving forward with the contrapositive, since they are in negation, we need to change the value. Now the biconditional result will be all true, and so we can say that the original implication and contrapositive are equivalent. Lastly, putting the values in inverse, the biconditional is not all true, then the original implication and inverse are not equivalent. As you see, the equivalents are the original conditional and contrapositive. Furthermore, converse and inverse are also equivalent. In order to determine whether the arguments are valid, they must be in tautology. So what is tautology? To be precise, there are 3 types of propositions: tautology, contradiction, and contingency. If the argument is said to be tautology, then that means that its final values and truth values are all the same. If it's a contradiction, then all final values are different, and if the final values are sometimes true and sometimes false, then it is contradiction. As you can see in the previous table, the original conditional and contrapositive reflects tautology, and the original conditional and converse as well as inverse reflects contingency. However, it is important to note that this does not mean that every statement is already considered as a valid argument. In order for an argument to be valid, its conclusion must be relevant, logical, and can be verified and supported. There are numerous fallacies, but we will present to you 3 fallacies which you commonly hear. One of these is the faulty cause and effect, which is a fallacy that presumes the causal relationship of one event to another. For example, whenever I see a black cat in the street, misfortune happens. The street is considered an accident-prone area, that is why there are misfortunes in the street, and it is not because of the black cat. There is also a fallacy called circular logic, in which the reason and conclusion are just similar and the individual only restates it. For example, albularians are the best people to go to when sick because it is better than any doctors. Aside from that, there is also the either-or fallacy in which an individual is persuaded that there are no other viewpoints but the two choices that are perceived to be right or wrong. For example, love your culture or change nationality. Now, let's move on to the next superstition.
Ano, nakapag-English ka na ba?
Hindi pa.
Kaya mo yan.
Ay, sana.
Now let's talk about another superstition which is health-related. Hala, tulungan natin siya!
Kailangan niyo ba ng tulong? Oo, bilis. Tulong. Hello? Hello, tulungan ako.
Hindi ko alam, bigla na lang natin. Justin?
Tabi, Gotoc, kwak-kwak, mas makakatulong pa ako kaysa sa'yo.
Albularyo?
Oo, nag-med school pero hindi kayo matulungan. Surveillance lang yan. Pakamid mo lang ako. Si Papa, ano mo rin sa iyo? Diba? Justin.
Maraming salamat po.
Diba? Huwag ka nang pupunta sa doktor, ha?
What you have just witnessed is an example of what an albulario does. They use various herbs and medicinal properties to heal people and alleviate their afflictions. Rumor has it that an albulario practices magic, enabling them to actually heal people. Hence, a superstition revolving around them is that they can cure illnesses that medical doctors cannot. The following statement, faith healers or an albulario can cure illnesses that medical doctors cannot, can be converted into the premise an albulario can heal illnesses. If a medical doctor cannot cure it, which is a conditional containing a negation with the two propositional variables labeled as D, for a medical doctor can cure illnesses, and O, for an albulario can heal illnesses. Assuming that an albulario can indeed heal illnesses, as indicated in the second premise indicated by O, we can then presume that medical doctors cannot heal illnesses, as stated by the negation of D. This would form the argument an albulario can heal illnesses if a medical doctor cannot cure it, and an albulario can heal illnesses. Therefore, a medical doctor cannot cure illnesses. The previous statement is an example of deductive arguments. But what are deductive arguments? As indicated in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, deductive arguments determine the validity of an argument by having the premises of an argument guarantee the truthfulness of the conclusion. If the premises of a deductive argument are true, then the conclusion of the argument must also be true. A deductive argument in the propositional form is the conjunction of all the premises implying the conclusion. To aid us in determining the truthfulness of the deductive argument and prove the superstition through logical reasoning, we would use rules of replacement to help us understand this problem better. But first, what are rules of replacement? According to Garth Kemmerling, there are two sets of propositional variables that are both tautological and biconditional, used to replace statements in order to help in proving them by making them simpler to comprehend. The first statement, or rather, premise formed by the superstition, an albulario can heal illnesses if a medical doctor cannot cure it, can be made simpler as a medical doctor can cure illnesses or an albulario can heal it, applying the concept of material implication. Normally, material implication states that statement A implies statement B is equivalent to the negation of A or B. But for our current premise, which includes a negation in the form of a medical doctor cannot cure, would have to be transformed to a medical doctor cannot not cure, which makes no sense at all. As such, we have to apply another rule of replacement called double negation, turning the statement into a medical doctor can cure and thus fulfilling the premise. And so, we now have two arguments formed from our superstition. An albulario can heal illnesses if a medical doctor cannot cure it. An albulario can heal illnesses, therefore, a medical doctor cannot cure illnesses. And a medical doctor can cure illnesses or an albulario can heal it. An albulario can heal illnesses, therefore, a medical doctor cannot cure illnesses. The following is the truth table to determine the validity of the arguments presented. So, in the first argument, we use the values of the negation of D, which is false, false, true, true, and O, which is true, false, true, false. to determine the values of the implication, which is true, true, false, false. And then we use the values of O again to evaluate the conjunction, having true, false, false. Afterwards, we use the values of the conjunction, which is true, false, and the negation of D to determine the value of the implication, which is false, true, true. We do the same as well for the second argument. We input the values of D and O to evaluate the disjunction, which is true, true, false. And then we use those values alongside O to determine the conjunction, which is true, false. Finally, we use them as well as the values of the negation of D to evaluate the implication, giving us false, true. As you can see, both arguments belong to the contingency propositional form, in which they contain both true and false values. It can be deduced that the arguments of the superstition may or may not be completely true or false. As the deductive arguments are shown to be invalid, they are to be considered fallacies. As stated by Michael Laboussiere, fallacies are invalid arguments that could have true premises but contain a false conclusion. The first argument is an example of the fallacy of affirming the consequent, in which we claim that the consequent or conclusion is to be true and assume that the antecedent or hypothesis is true as well, as shown in the example. In the statement, an albularia can heal illnesses if a medical doctor cannot cure it, the ability of an albularia to heal is inadequate to discredit the skillfulness of medical professionals, while the second argument illustrates the fallacy of affirming a disjunct. It occurs if a disjunction has one of the options be true and concludes that the other option is false, making a false presumption. For the case of our second argument, this is incorrect. The fact that an albularia can heal is not enough to claim that doctors cannot heal at all. Both arguments, and thus the superstition as a whole, show that the ability of albularios to heal people does not necessarily mean that medical professionals cannot cure illnesses at all. But this doesn't mean that albularios are just to be disregarded as a flaw. As they can heal people using herbal medicine, it's just that we should always consult our doctors for civil and medical conditions. Now that we have covered up this age-old myth about medical practitioners, we now move on to another common superstition for when medicine has failed and a person has to be brought to their final resting place.
Oh, I just came from a funeral of a very special friend and I'm thinking if I should go home already. Ay, what a tiring day talaga. So here's the scenario. After going to a funeral, if you do not take a short stop anywhere before going home, then the spirit of the deceased will follow you home. The spirit of the deceased did not follow you home, and you will receive good luck. Either you do not take a short stop anywhere before going home, or you will receive good luck. If you will receive good luck, then you will not have bad dreams. Therefore, you will not have bad dreams. In this argument, we have a total of 4 premises and 1 conclusion. Let's start by labeling each premise with their respective logical operators. Let's start with the first premise. If you do not take a short stop anywhere before going home, then the spirit of the deceased will follow you home. We label that as ~s arrow D, or not S implies D. For the second premise, the spirit of the deceased did not follow you home, and you will receive good luck. We label that as ~D G, or not D and G. The third premise is either you do not take a short stop anywhere before going home, or you will receive good luck. We label that as ~S inverted G, or not S or G. The last premise is if you will receive good luck, then you will not have bad dreams. We label that as G arrow ~B, or G implies not B. Then, we label the conclusion as therefore not B. Since we have a lot of propositions and premises in one argument, we cannot prove its validity by using a truth table as it would take us plenty of time. But what we can do to prove its validity is by using rules of inference. So what are the different rules of inference? First, we have addition, in which its argument form is P, therefore P or Q. Next, we have simplification, which is P and Q, therefore P. Or it could be P and Q, therefore Q. The third rule is conjunction, which is P, Q, therefore P and Q. The fourth rule is modus ponens, which is P implies Q, P, therefore Q. Next is modus tollens, which is P implies Q, not Q, therefore not P. Next, we have disjunctive syllogism, which is P or Q, not P, therefore Q. Lastly, we have hypothetical syllogism, which is P implies Q, Q implies R, therefore P implies R. So now that we know the different rules of inference, let us apply these in our given argument to prove its validity. Shown on your screens is the solution board in identifying the rules of inference we will be using. We could start by putting in not B as premise number 5 due to the simplification of premise 2. Next, using premise 1 and premise 5, we do modus tollens to come up with not S for premise 6. Since not S looks and sounds redundant, we'll be using a rule of replacement, which is double negation, to change not S to just simply S. Before we proceed to premise number 7, we could use a rule of replacement, which is material implication, to convert the third premise into S implies G. Then, proceeding to premise number 7, we use modus ponens on premises 3 and 6 to get G. Now, to arrive at our conclusion, we use modus ponens again with premises 4 and 7, and we will get not B. Since we proved the validity of the argument using rules of inference and rules of replacement, we can say that the type of proposition in this example is surely a tautology, where everything is true. Okay, so that's it for my superstition, and I think I have to take a short stop somewhere before going home so that I won't get bad luck. So, okay, bye!
Thank you very much, Chi, Matthew, and Justin for the wonderful segment about superstitions. Now, we are off to our next segment for today, which is about social choice theory. This is Boto ng Bayan!
So based on our segment title, we are going to talk about the recent 2022 Philippine presidential elections as our topic. But first, let us refresh our minds. What happened in the recently held 2022 national presidential elections?
6 years, one administration. Somewhere along the last few months of the 6th year, a national election is conducted to determine who will be majorly responsible for the country and its citizens for a new set of 6 years. No matter what year or era it is, the most controversial position is the presidency. But with the involvement of the youth this year, the 2022 presidential election is no doubt a national event to remember. On the 9th of May 2022, Filipinos across the country started their day with their chosen government officials in mind. A total of 56,097,722 Filipinos practiced their right to vote in hopes of continuing or changing the legacy of the previous administration and state of the nation. But only 53,815,484 Filipinos casted their votes for a candidate running for presidency. With each passing hour throughout that day, our anxiousness continuously increased as we awaited for the results of the election. At night, on the same day, the long-awaited partial and unofficial numbers were released. The numbers grew up to its official count, but the rankings remained. Marcos won the presidency with 31,629,783 votes, followed by Robredo with 15,035,773 votes, Pacquiao with 3,663,113 votes, Domagoso with 1,933,909 votes, Lacson with 892,375 votes, Mangandato with 301,629 votes, Abella with 114,627 votes, De Guzman with 93,027 votes, Gonzales with 90,656 votes, and Montemayor with 60,592 votes. No matter who were their chosen candidates, some remained hopeful, some felt anger, some released tears, and some wanted to celebrate. As part of the Filipino youth, not only did we experience various emotions in one sitting, but also questioning. Multiple what-ifs were shared amidst the sector, which remained unanswered until now.
Yes, that's true. So now, let's discuss a math topic we use for decision making.
This is social choice theory.
Every vote counts. Technically, the future of the country rests on the shoulders of the voters as they hold the power to overturn and change the outcome of the decision. In line with this, social choice theory is concerned with different processes in which different individuals with different preferences are grouped together into a single choice. Voting is the primary method used in a democratic society to arrive at a singular decision. Before we dive deeper into the application of social choice theory, let us first name some terminologies. First, we have the preference ballot. This ballot allows voters to rank all candidates from first to last. However, we must keep in mind that we cannot rank two candidates in one place. Next, we have the preference table. This table summarizes how many times each possible ballot, which as mentioned previously contains the rankings of the candidates, was submitted. For our application, the preference table is presented on your screens. This table was based on the rankings of the candidates per region. And lastly, we have a voting method. It is defined as the mathematical procedure that helps us in determining a winner with the help of the data presented in a preference table.
We have 6 different voting methods that we can use, which means we have 6 different ways to declare a winner. Let us discuss and apply them one by one.
To start, let us first discuss the first voting method, which is plurality voting. The plurality voting method states that the person who gets the most votes is declared as the winner. Out of all the voting methods, it is the most simplest and most used during election. However, the voting method can still produce uncertain results, such that it may require a tiebreaker to determine the winner. To further understand the voting method, let us look at the table flashed on your screens that presents the final result of the recent presidential election. Out of all the presidential candidates, Marcos and Robredo were the only ones who received first place votes from different regions, since Marcos got the votes of Region 1, 2, 3, 4A, 4B, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, CAR, NCR, BARMM, and the absentees, garnering a percentage of 85.20% of the votes, which is equivalent to 45,851,900 people. He is followed by Robredo, who won in Region 5 and 6, garnering 14.80% of the votes, equivalent to 7,963,584 people. In this case, Marcos wins through the plurality of votes.
Next, we have the majority method. As the name suggests, the candidate who receives more than 50% of the votes wins the election. Now you might be wondering, how is this different from the plurality method? If a candidate wins through the majority method, then that candidate is already guaranteed a win under plurality method as well. However, there are times where a winning candidate has most number of votes, but is less than 50%. This usually happens when there are more than 2 candidates. To further explain how this works, let us apply the method to the results of the 2022 presidential election. For this year, a total of 53,815,484 Filipinos were able to cast their votes for their chosen presidential candidate. As mentioned, for a candidate to win under this method, they must receive more than 50% of the votes. In actual numbers, the winning candidate must receive more than 26,907,742 votes. As you can see on the table presented on your screens, the candidates are ranked based on the number of votes or rankings they receive per region. Now, if you take a look, Marcos and Robredo are the only ones out of the 10 candidates who received the first place votes. This allows us to eliminate the rest of the candidates and focus our analysis on the garnered votes of the two. Marcos was able to win Region 1, CAR, 2, 3, NCR, 4A, 4B, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, BARMM, and the absentees. On the other hand, Robredo was only to win Region 5 and 6 only. If we add the percentage of the votes per region into the respective winning candidates, Marcos received 85.20% of the first place votes and Robredo received 14.80%. Thus, Marcos won the presidential election through the majority method.
As for the Condorcet method, it allows a certain candidate to be the sole winner if he or she could beat them in a head-to-head contest using the majority rule. Thus, this method would also be considered the same as the majority method if there are only two candidates. In this case, Marcos wins through the Condorcet method. Flashed on your screens are the results in which Marcos completely dominates Abella, De Guzman, Domagoso, Gonzales, Lacson, Mangondato, Montemayor, and Pacquiao, garnering 100% vote of the people in all regions, while the said candidates garnered a score of 0. Marcos also defeated Robredo as 14.80% of the total voter population. Specifically, individuals from Region 5 and 6 picked her as the best presidential candidate, while the rest picked Marcos.
The board account method allows us to use the point system in determining the winner of the election. For us to know the number of points assigned per place, let us use our real-life example. In this case, since there are 10 candidates, we're able to rank them from 1 to 10. The number of points received for the candidate who placed first is 9, since we deducted 1 from 10, the total number of rankings. The same process continues. We deduct 2 from 10 for the second place, 3 from 10 for the third place, and so on, until we reach 10th place, which receives 0 points. Now, for us to determine how many points each candidate receives, we will be multiplying the number of votes per region with the assigned points of the respective rankings per region as well. For us to better explain the process, let us use the ranking of the presidential candidates for Region 1. As mentioned, the first placer, which in this case is Marcos, gets 9 points. But since 5.60% of the votes came from Region 1, we will be multiplying 5.60% to 9. This equates to 0.504. The total points received by Marcos from Region 1 for his first place ranking. Let us proceed to the candidate in second place, who will receive 8 points. If we multiply 5.60% by 8, Robredo will be receiving a total score of 0.448 from Region 1. For third place candidate, which is Domagoso, he will be receiving a score of 0.392 from Region 1, since we will be multiplying 5.60% by 7, which is a point assigned to the candidate in third place. The same process of multiplying the assigned points to the percentage of voters per region is done until we reach the final set of rankings. The final points assigned to each candidate based on their rankings per region is given as presented on your screens. Now, it is time for us to determine the winner. To do this, we will be computing the border score of each candidate. The border score is the sum of all scores garnered by a candidate. To further explain, let us use our real-life example. Pacquiao received a score of 0.336 from Region 1, 0.1002 from CAR, 0.2429 from Region 2, 0.5715 from Region 3, 0.5475 from NCR, 0.585 from Region 4A, 0.3612 from Region 4B, 0.4165 from Region 5, 0.6188 from Region 6, 0.4627 from Region 7, 0.3248 from Region 8, 0.2576 from Region 9, 0.3664 from Region 10, 0.372 from Region 11, 0.3308 from Region 12, 0.1939 from Region 13, 0.1805 from BARMM, and 0.068 from the absentees. If we add these together, Pacquiao will be receiving a board score of 6.3063. The same process of adding all scores garnered by the candidate per region is done until all the 10 candidates have their own board scores as reflected on your screens. Now, the one with the highest computed board score wins the election, which in our case is Marcos.
The sequential pairwise method determines a winning candidate by making a specific agenda. In other words, candidates are placed in a certain order and will be compared to other candidates to know who has the most votes. The process will be repeated until a winning candidate is declared. In order to understand this, we prepared two different agendas. The first one is based on the candidate's order in the ballot, while the other one is completely randomized. To avoid confusion in regards to the agenda, we have specifically assigned each presidential candidate a letter. A for Abella, B for De Guzman, C for Domagoso, D for Gonzales, E for Lacson, F for Mangondato, G for Marcos, H for Montemayor, I for Pacquiao, and J for Robredo. For the first agenda, in which the agenda is based on the candidate's order in the ballot, it is observed that Abella dominates De Guzman as he accumulated a percentage of 75.68%, while the latter only garnered a percentage of 24.32%. Nonetheless, in the next round, Abella is completely dominated by Domagoso, as all of the votes are given to Domagoso. Domagoso will also defeat Lacson as the latter only garnered a percentage of 1.67%. While Domagoso once again completely defeats another candidate, which is Mangondato, by garnering all the votes, he lost to Marcos in the next round as he has garnered all the votes now. This pattern is also seen when he is pitted to Montemayor and Pacquiao. Lastly, Marcos also defeats Robredo as she only garnered a percentage of 14.80%. Let us now move on to the second agenda, which is FHBADECGIJ. From the start, we have Mangondato and Montemayor outvoting each other. However, Mangondato won the round as he got 66.04% of the votes, while the latter only got 33.96%. In the next round, Mangondato is defeated by De Guzman as De Guzman wins by 66.19% of the votes. Sadly, in the following round, De Guzman is defeated by Abella since De Guzman only got a percentage of 22.65%, whereas Abella got 77.35%. Abella also defeated Gonzales as the latter only got 26.97%. In the following round, however, Abella is completely defeated by Lacson as he got all of the votes. In the next round, Lacson loses to Domagoso since the latter got 93.33% of the votes. Though he was eventually defeated by Marcos, while Pacquiao and Robredo were also defeated by Marcos respectively. Regardless of the agendas being completely randomized, Marcos will still win since he got the votes of 16 regions plus the absentees, while Robredo only got 2.
Next is the hair system method. This type of voting allows us to repeatedly eliminate candidates who are considered to be least preferred. To further elaborate, let us take a look at our preference table. If we look at the first place candidates, we can see that it is only composed of 2 out of 10 candidates, Marcos and Robredo. I guess we can say that despite having 10 candidates, the fight for the presidential position was actually only between Marcos and Robredo. Looking at the overall table, the previous statement can be justified further with the fact that the 2 mentioned candidates are consistently placed in the top 3 in every region. With that, we will be eliminating the rest of the candidates. Thus, the new preference table as presented. Marcos won in multiple regions, while Robredo only won in 2. With that, Marcos once again won the election through the hair system method.
Last but not the least, let us tackle the approval method. Approval method allows each voter to cast their vote for as many candidates as he or she wishes. However, they cannot cast more than one vote for each candidate that they like. The winner will be the candidate who garnered the highest number of votes. In this case, the approval method is not applicable for presidential elections simply because the voting method is usually more applicable to use in large elections, such that multi-winners are expected. For example, the approval method is normally used in senatorial elections since there are up to 12 posts available for candidates to fill, whereas there can only be one official president of the Philippines.
In our everyday life, we must make sure to determine if the arguments presented to us are valid or invalid. Moreover, as a student, it is our duty to practice a logical pattern of reasoning, making sure that it is relevant, verifiable, and have a supporting evidence to reason that it is indeed true.
From the superstitions presented a while ago, we saw how these superstitions are passed down from generation to generation. Due to the respect for our elders, we must follow and listen to what they say. But let me remind everyone that we are individuals who are rational and can analyze, and we must use that to determine if what we are receiving is indeed true.
Lies, deception, misinformation. They are everywhere. As we became more progressive and technological, so as the means to spread fake news. That is why we must learn to recognize the arguments and the knowledgeable enough to issues and topics so we won't be part of the means of delivering this fake news to other people.
Aside from logic and reasoning, social choice theory has indeed contributed to how our world is shaped today. All humans are unique and distinct in their own ways. Meaning to say, everyone has their own opinions and preferences that others may or may not favor. But with the help of social choice theory, people are able to segregate themselves and to form a collective decision. Hence, it can be said that without this, it may cause chaos among people that may ultimately not only destroy relationships but also a whole civilization.
Before we end today's episode, let us have an ending performance just for you.
To perform an original song, which is the remix of Tunay na Pilipino, let's welcome
Justin Dela Rosa!
Kita sa buong mundo ang pagmamahal sa bayanan, ang ating wikang kinagisnan. Tunay na Pilipino, sa isip, sa salita at gawa, kailanman ay di mawawala. Yan ang tunay na Pilipino. Sa bayang sinilangan, aking puso'y maligaya. Pagiging Pilipino ay isang malaking karangalan. Masarap ang masdan ang ating kultura na bahagi ng ating katangian. Sa bawat sandali, ipaglalaban ang sarili. Iisipin na ito'y para sa atin. Ating kalayaan, anuman ang mangyari, wag hayaang mawala sa atin. Tunay na Pilipino, ipakita sa buong mundo ang pagmamahal sa bayanan, ang ating wikang kinagisnan. Tunay na Pilipino, sa isip, sa salita at gawa, kailanman ay di mawawala. Yan ang tunay na Pilipino. Pilipino. Tunay na Pilipino, ipakita sa buong mundo ang pagmamahal sa bayanan, ang ating wikang kinagisnan. Tunay na Pilipino, sa isip, sa salita at gawa, kailanman ay di mawawala. Yan ang tunay na Pilipino. Tunay na Pilipino, ipakita sa buong mundo ang pagmamahal sa bayanan, ang ating wikang kinagisnan. Tunay na Pilipino, sa isip, sa salita at gawa, kailanman ay di mawawala. Yan ang tunay na Pilipino.
Thank you very much for staying tuned to our show. Once again, on behalf of all the hosts, I am Justin Dela Rosa, and this has been MathTara! Bye-bye!